Jimmy Carter is just one of a few presidents whose life after the White House is considered to be just as interesting and maybe even more influential than his time in office. In 1982, the former president and his wife set up the not-for-profit Carter Center with the goal of advancing human rights and alleviating human suffering. Carter went on to receive the Nobel Peace Prize for his work through the center.
Most work of the Carter Center is in remote villages in the poorest nations in Africa. And there I have witnessed the capacity of destitute people to persevere under heartbreaking conditions. I have come to admire their judgment and wisdom, their courage and faith, and their awesome accomplishments when given a chance to use their innate abilities. But tragically, in the industrialized world, there's a terrible absence of understanding or concern about those who are enduring lives of despair and hopelessness.
Jimmy Carter. Ambassador Susan D. Page is a trustee of the Carter Center and a professor of practice in international diplomacy at the University of Michigan. Hello there, Susan.
Good morning, I
It's
guess.
good morning for us. I think it's very late in the evening for you, so we're grateful to you for speaking to us. Tell us about the first time you met President Carter.
Well, I had known about the Carter Center for years, and the very first time I personally met President Carter was in Plains, Georgia, at his residence, where he welcomed me and my son, who was maybe 14 or 15 at the time. And we met him. This was in 2013. I was then ambassador to South Sudan, home for a short trip in April. And he just opened the door, greeted us personally as if we were old friends. Just the humility and personality. He was just wonderful.
His humility is something which people speak volumes about, and it seems to have infused all of his later work post-presidency. But let's just focus on the presidential legacy of the president first, because as a one-term president, he had an awful lot to deal with, but he had some notable successes as well. What's your recollection and assessment of what President Carter achieved during his time in office?
Well, speaking for myself personally, one of the things that I most liked about President Carter's time in office, although I was younger, obviously, what he did was to reinvest in human rights and our values as Americans. And it was, of course, a different time, but he established the human rights report, the annual human rights report that is issued by the U.S. Department of State every year, annually, about every country in the world, excluding the United States, and how they are doing on human rights. He invested in creating the Department of Education, which, of course, right now is under quite a bit of stress. And he expanded the Wildlife Service by investing in more lands for the protection of wildlife.
And in his later work, particularly with the Carter Center, it was the work on the guinea worm, which we heard a little bit about during the news earlier this morning, which sounds like a really horrendous parasite affecting humans in Africa. And you went on an election observation mission with the center to Guyana, and it was that which then got you onto the board of trustees at the Carter Center. So to tell us a bit more about the Carter Center, because there will be many people in this country who aren't quite aware of the breadth of work that it does.
Yes, so the Carter Center it really is guided by the founding principles of President and Mrs. Rosalind Carter, and they really believe strongly in the fundamental commitment to human rights and the alleviation of human suffering. They seek to prevent conflicts, build democracy, enhance freedom, and of course, improve health outcomes around the world. So the Carter Center does conduct a number of long-term and short-term election observation missions. As you mentioned, I went on the one to Guyana, which was actually quite momentous, and it coincided with the beginning of the Ebola outbreak. So we ended up leaving shortly after it was determined that people's health was going to be at risk from Ebola. Oh, sorry, Ebola. I'm so sorry. From COVID-19. My apologies. But they do these election observations looking at the whole system in a country and not just flying in a week before elections and talking to a few people. And the one reason that they are so good at that is because they invest in the country. They have long-term and long-standing relationships, and they want to look at entire systems and not just election day or election results. So they're trusted by officials around the world, and I'm really pleased to be associated with the Carter Center as a trustee.
And finally, Ambassador, just before we go, President Carter does seem like a man from a different age. He was a man from a different age. We know he was very keen to cast his vote for Kamala Harris. It didn't work out for the Democrats this time round. How do you think he compares and would reflect on the quality and the standard of politicians in the American presidential races nowadays?
Well, I think what really guided him was his commitment to his own values and principles, truth, and his responsibility to his core values, and never cheating on his principles. And I think that is one thing that really matters. It mattered a lot when he took office after President Nixon, but it also matters today, where unfortunately we are having a very serious problem with truth and truth telling. So I think he was just a remarkable man, humble, incredibly smart, ahead of his time. And I hope that people will take some lessons from what he achieved, both within the presidency as well as after his presidency.
Certainly an extraordinary life well lived. Ambassador Susan D. Page, thank you very much for your time. That's Susan D. Page, who is a trustee of the Carter Center and a professor of practice in international diplomacy at the University of Michigan.
This is a sad day, but it brings back an incredible amount of good memories. Today, America and the world, in my view, lost a remarkable leader. He was a statesman and humanitarian. And Jill and I lost a dear friend. What I find extraordinary about Jimmy Carter, though, is that millions of people all around the world, all over the world, feel they lost a friend as well, even though they never met him. And that's because Jimmy Carter lived a life measured not by words, but by his deeds. Just look at his life's work. He worked to eradicate disease, not just at home, but around the world. He forged peace, advanced civil rights, human rights, promoted free and fair elections around the world. He built housing for the homeless with his own hands. And his compassion and moral clarity lifted people up and changed lives and saved lives all over the globe. The entire Carter family, on behalf of the world, the whole nation, we send our whole heartfelt sympathies and gratitude. Our gratitude for sharing President Carter with us for so many years.